what did the life of a Nubian kingdom actually look like? In this animated documentary, you'll know exactly how they lived. The video walks through a reconstructed Nubian kingdom's house and shows what family life and work life were like. This is the perfect introduction to the daily life of the Nubian kingdom. The land and the river. The Nubian kingdom owed everything to the Nile. But don't think of it like the calm river you see in Egypt. Up here, the water was fierce. It was wild. Imagine trying to navigate a boat through 6 massive cataracts. These violent, jagged rapids that made travel a total nightmare. But honestly, that was Nubia's greatest gift. It was a natural fortress. Before an enemy could even dream of facing a Nubian warrior, they had to survive the river itself. When you look at the landscape today, it's actually beautiful. It's the kind of place that makes you feel relaxed. You have these vast, silent deserts stretching out forever in every direction. But right in the middle of all that sand, there's this tiny, vibrant green corridor hugging the riverbank. If you were a Nubian farmer, that tiny ribbon of green was your entire world. One step past that line, and you weren't just farming anymore. You were fighting to stay alive.
Social structure. Who really ran Nubia? Like most ancient worlds, Nubia had a strict ladder of power. At the very top was the king, or the core. He wasn't just a politician, he was a spiritual leader, almost a bridge between the gods and the people. But here is where Nubia leaves almost every other ancient civilization in the dust: the women. Beside the king stood the kandakes, or queen mothers. These weren't just figureheads or wives of the king. These women held the real keys to the kingdom. They commanded armies, they signed treaties, and they made the big decisions. In other parts of the world, a woman in charge was a scandal. In Nubia, it was just Tuesday. It was expected. Right under the royalty, you had the engine room of the empire, the priests, the warriors, and the nobles who managed the vast stretches of land. Then you had the middle class, the master craftsmen. These guys were the rock stars of their day, the metal workers, the weavers, and the legendary potters whose work was so good that even the Egyptians were jealous. And finally, at the base of it all, were the farmers and laborers. They were the backbone of the whole thing. Without them, the palaces and the temples don't get built, and the soldiers don't eat.
Work life of a Nubian farmer.
If you were a Nubian farmer, your day started before sunrise. Not because someone told you to, but because the heat demanded it. By mid-morning, the desert sun was merciless. You learned quickly to respect it. Your farm was located near the Nile, on land made fertile by yearly floods, similar to Egyptian farmers. Your primary crops were sorghum and millet. You also grew barley, legumes, and along the riverbanks, date palms and dome palms, whose fruit fed your family and whose wood built your home. Cattle were central to Nubian life. A herd was your wealth, your social standing, and your spiritual offering all at once. A man with many cattle was a man of consequence. Nubian cattle were some of the finest in the ancient world, long-horned, strong, and enormously valued by Egyptian traders who came south specifically to acquire them. A lot of time would be spent on irrigation, because irrigation was daily work. Nubian farmers used the shadoof to move water from the Nile to their fields. This was slow, and they were exhausted.
Nubian houses.
Nubian homes often featured rounded corners and thick walls that absorbed heat during the day and released it slowly at night, keeping interiors cool without any modern technology whatsoever. Wealthier homes had multiple rooms arranged around a central courtyard where the family gathered in the evenings. Poorer families lived more compactly, but the courtyard concept persisted even in modest dwellings. Life was meant to be lived outdoors, in community, under the stars. Furniture was minimal. Reed mats covered the floors, a clay storage vessel in the corner held your grain. Pottery, and Nubian pottery deserves its own story, was some of the finest in the ancient world. Thin-walled, elegantly decorated with geometric patterns in black and red, Nubian pots were so beautiful that Egyptians actively imported them. In your home, these weren't luxury items. They were the dishes you ate from every single day.
Food and drink.
Nubian cuisine was hearty and practical. Sorghum was ground into flour and baked into thick flatbreads, eaten at nearly every meal. A porridge made from millet was common, especially for children and the elderly. Dried and salted Nile fish supplemented the diet and provided critical protein. On special occasions, beef or goat would be slaughtered. Dates were everywhere, eaten fresh, dried, and fermented into a date wine that served much the same social function that beer served in Egypt. You drank it at meals, at festivals, and offered it to your ancestors at the family shrine. Honey was prized, sesame oil was used in cooking, and trade networks meant that spices and goods from the African interior occasionally made their way onto Nubian tables.
Trade of Nubian Kingdom.
Perhaps no single fact better defines Nubian civilization than this. They sat at the crossroads of Africa. To their north was Egypt. To their south and west, the vast African interior. Civilizations, forests, and resources that Egypt could barely imagine. Nubia was the middleman, and being the middleman made Nubia extraordinarily powerful. Gold from the surrounding desert hills was Nubia's most famous export. So abundant was Nubian gold that the ancient Egyptian word for gold, nub, is almost certainly derived from the land itself. Ivory, ebony, leopard skins, ostrich feathers, and enslaved people all passed through Nubian hands on their way north to Egypt and beyond. An ordinary Nubian farmer or craftsman felt this trade in their daily life. Markets were active. Goods from distant places were not unusual. A degree of cosmopolitan energy ran through Nubian towns that many neighboring civilizations lacked.
Family and free time.
Nubian families were tight-knit and multi-generational. Grandparents, parents, and children lived and worked in close proximity, with elders commanding deep respect. Children began contributing to household work early, herding animals, fetching water, helping in the fields. But play was never completely absent from childhood. Wrestling was a beloved pastime across all of Nubian society, from children to adult men who competed at festivals. Archery was not merely a military skill, but a point of cultural pride. Nubians were so extraordinarily gifted with the bow that ancient Egyptians literally called Nubia Ta Seti, the land of the bow. To be a skilled archer in Nubia was to carry a badge of cultural identity. Music, drumming, and dance were woven into celebrations, religious ceremonies, and everyday communal life. The evenings, when the heat finally broke, were for family, for storytelling, and for the kind of quiet satisfaction that comes from hard work honestly done. Nubia was never a civilization that stood still. It absorbed influences, resisted invasions, traded across continents, and produced rulers who once sat on Egypt's own throne. But underneath all that grand history were ordinary men and women, farmers watching the Nile, potters at their wheels, mothers grinding millet before dawn, children wrestling in the dust. Their story is not a footnote to Egypt's. It is a story entirely its own, and it deserves to be told.